Well, I had the privilege of seeing a delightful film over the weekend, beautiful and thought-provoking, a new film about Mary Magdalene, a character in the Bible that perhaps we know too little about. Joining me in the studio is the director of that film, Garth Davis. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Nice to be here.
So, I mean, this is an iconic character from the Bible. However, Mary Magdalene has been misrepresented, even maligned over the years. What led you to tell this story?
Well, the story came to me, interestingly, and I understand why now, because the producers, Ian Canning and Emil Sherman, I think they're really interested in the spiritual telling of this story. So they brought it to me because that's my interest. And look, when I read it, I was just completely taken by Mary's journey and by the spiritualism of the story. And like Lion, you know, how it explored the themes of love, unconditional love as well. But there was another side to things where it was a very different telling to what I was used to. And we realised that the fallen woman that we're all aware of today was an interpretation by Pope Gregory in the 6th century. And really the true Mary Magdalene story has been kind of hidden for so long. So I just thought, this is crazy her story hasn't been told. So I felt very enthused and passionate about bringing her to life.
In some ways, it's a redemption story for Mary in terms of the way in which she's been misrepresented through history, a way of retelling her story through a more sensitive and, I suppose, a more sympathetic lens.
That's right, and I think seeing a story from a woman's point of view is fascinating because you really get a sense of how women who have a spiritual calling of that time, it was very difficult for them to explore it because of the patriarchy. And I think that's one of the central themes in the film as well.
Certainly the way in which Jesus treated women was perhaps very different than the way the church treated women in the thousands of years which followed that.
Yes, take note. Well, it makes more sense, doesn't it?
When it comes to telling any story on film, of course, one of the essential ingredients is casting. Some crucial casting decisions in the key roles, but I must say some wonderful performances of what are some very nuanced and quite quite difficult things to get your head around.
Yeah, I was very keen on making this world very human and immersive and relatable. The characters relatable, like you get under the skin of the characters. I often find in previous tellings of this story, which I love, by the way, I just always felt a bit removed, like I'm being told a story, where I just thought I really wanted to modernise it and really kind of relate to them. So that led me to try and find actors that have that acting ability, where they can be very alive and real. And so, I mean, Rooney, Joaquin, Chiwetel, Taha, they're all just incredible actors that, you know, it feels like they're not acting, like you're finding a place of truth.
It was that sort of, we're watching people go through some difficult circumstances. Yes, there was some wonderful delivery of dialogue, but it wasn't in the dialogue. It was in the slow, longing looks. It was in the eye contact and the silences, the pauses. That's where a lot of the emotion was conveyed.
Yeah, well, the thematic of the themes of the film really is that God is within us, you know, and we've got to stop forecasting and imagining what God's going to bring. We just got to actually honour who we are in the moment. And I think we slowed things down and we kind of really highlighted those silences. And you can see in those moments the characters connecting to God, connecting to something. And I think all of us can relate to that.
The location, again, very key to telling this story. When it came to choosing a location which suited the pace of the narrative you wanted to tell us about that process, Garth.
Well, I love locations. It's a big piece of how I work. I like to remind people that we're on a planet and we're part of nature, and in this story, it really resonated. I thought, you know, you really explore your spiritual question in the landscape. But no, we did go to Israel and we travelled from the Sea of Galilee right up to Jerusalem, researching all of that, and then we travelled around the world and we found it all in Italy. Italy had all the landscapes, so we shot in Sicily for Mary's hometown and went up to Puglia for the rest of the film.
No, some absolutely wonderful locations as well. Without putting any spoilers in here, because I really would encourage people to see this film, especially as we're heading into the Easter season. I think some of the themes and the questions that it raises are wonderful to think about and to contemplate as we head towards Easter. But in terms of your take on some of the key characters and the reactions and their motivations, it would be fair to say that some of the characters that traditionally would be seen as unsympathetic characters are portrayed with a different lens, and then vice versa. Some of the sympathetic characters from the traditional story we perhaps know are seen as more unsympathetic. Was that intentional, or did that just come with the script?
Well, it's it's intentional, and the unsympathetic views came from the Gospel of Mary. So that was our ends. I can't spoil. Can't be a bit of a spoiler to talk about it. But yeah, I suppose you're referring to Judas and our sympathetic take on Judas, which I think is fascinating. I mean, the writers, they just didn't trust that if this character spent all this time with Jesus' ministry, would do him in for money. They just didn't trust that, so they found another way of creating that betrayal. He's doing out of blind love, and I think that's a fascinating look at his character.
Certainly, looking at motivations in what would have been a very emotive situation and the way in which that was conveyed. Also, I think very much a story of expectation and disillusionment, in some ways very much a story of hope and despair. It's a story that many people will know well, but very much a refreshing look on that, helping us to rethink perhaps how we would have reacted in similar situations.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely see, you're presented with a time where they're living under tyranny from the Roman rule. These people are desperate for their lives to be free, and when a prophet comes along like Jesus, who they truly believe is a prophet, they obviously can feel that their lives are going to change for the better. But it also looks at how people can, blindly kind of invent and forecast what that might be. When in reality, the message is really saying it's inside of us. Yeah. And that's a really difficult thing for some of these people to accept.
I mean, that was something which did come through very clearly, especially in the conversation that, again, no spoilers, but that Mary had with Peter after the resurrection, that her summation of what it was all about, from her understanding of who Jesus was and what that meant for her faith, I mean, that was quite profound. However, it seems to have taken the church centuries to actually catch up with what Jesus was here for, what it was all about.
Well, that's why I was attracted to the material, because that makes sense to me. That really connects to me and how I live my life. And I even saw it in Lion. Like in Lion, the unconditional love that the mothers had, bore the miracle of him finding home, I think. Yep. So I do believe that miracles can happen and powerful things can happen if we really surrender to our own love within us.
This is a film very much about faith and about the faith of the individuals and how that's impacted by circumstances and how that changes. Do you think it helps to be a person of faith in terms of engaging with this material? Will people who come from a faith perspective connect with it in a particular or different way, do you think?
I think people of faith will love this movie. Maybe the far extreme conservative end might find it a little bit tricky. But I do think there's a lot of people in the faith, especially women, who probably just feel it's about time that Mary's story's told. And I've seen it in the Q&As and the screenings that women are just so excited that that women are being acknowledged, and also that Jesus really did listen to women and had women followers. I
mean, very much looking at what was quite a dark time in terms of the patriarchal society, the mistreatment of women, and particularly the first half of the movie really, really does show that hopelessness, the hope that was given through the ministry of Jesus, his relationship with women. Very much a message for our current times in terms of how not just the church but society at large is treating women. A very current message in some ways.
Well, exactly. So before I got this script, I was very moved by Malala. And at the Nobel Peace Prize, she stood up and she forgave the Taliban, which is incredible. Yeah. And she looked to her father, who must have had a huge courage to support her daughter going to school in Pakistan. And he said, thank you to her father. She said, thank you for treating me as a person, not as a woman. There was just something about that actually really moved me. I mean, in the clutter of war and noise and all this stuff, when you turn on the news, like, to hear that, it was like a clear light for me. So the DNA of that is in this story and in the messages of Jesus and Mary and what they kind of unearthed together. Forgiveness and acceptance.
A beautiful and powerful story, as I say, very thought-provoking, and a pleasure to see it. I'd certainly recommend it for people to see, especially coming up to this Easter season. Garth, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. Cheers.